Picture this, a lavish charity banquet. Crystal chandeliers casting golden light across tables draped in silk. Champagne glasses clinking. The wealthy elite of Sao Paulo mingling in tailored suits and designer gowns. And beneath one of those tables, curled up on the cold marble floor, a 7-year-old boy with dirt-streaked cheeks and torn clothes, watching polished shoes walk past him. His name was Miguel, and he had no idea that in the next 60 seconds, his entire life would change forever. But here's what will shock you even more: the man who pulled him out from under that table would teach him a lesson about success that most people spend their entire lives never learning. Stay with me, because this story isn't just about a random act of kindness. It's about a philosophy that challenges everything we've been taught about wealth, power, and what it truly means to make it in this world. Miguel wasn't supposed to be at that gala. He was supposed to be 3 blocks away, sleeping in the doorway of a closed bakery where the owner sometimes left him yesterday's bread. But on this particular November evening in 2011, he had followed the catering trucks, drawn by the intoxicating smell of roasted meats and fresh pastries. When security wasn't looking, he'd slipped through a service entrance, his small frame easily navigating the chaos of the kitchen prep area. His plan was simple: grab whatever food he could and disappear. But the ballroom was unlike anything he'd ever seen. For a moment, he just stood there, paralyzed by the overwhelming sensory assault of luxury he couldn't comprehend. When a server nearly collided with him while carrying a tower of champagne flutes, Miguel panicked and dove under the nearest table. From his hiding spot, he watched a world that seemed to exist in a different universe from his own. He watched perfectly manicured hands pick at plates of food that could have fed him for a week. He watched as guests left entire meals untouched while debating vacation homes and stock portfolios. The irony wasn't lost on him, even at 7 years old. He was surrounded by more food than he'd seen in his entire life, and yet he couldn't reach a single bite. For 2 hours, he stayed hidden, his stomach growling so loudly he was certain someone would hear it. What Miguel didn't know was that someone had noticed him. Roberto Oliveira, a self-made millionaire who'd built his fortune from a single food truck into a restaurant empire, had caught a glimpse of small fingers reaching out from beneath the tablecloth, desperately trying to grab a fallen dinner roll. While everyone else remained oblivious, Roberto excused himself from a conversation about real estate investments and quietly walked over to the table. He didn't call security. He didn't make a scene. Instead, he got down on his knees, lifted the tablecloth, and locked eyes with a terrified child who was certain his life was about to get much worse. Roberto extended his hand into the shadows under the table. "Come out, son. Nobody's going to hurt you." Miguel's first instinct was to run, but something in the man's voice stopped him. It wasn't pity. It wasn't anger. It was something Miguel had rarely experienced: respect. Slowly, cautiously, he took the offered hand and crawled out from his hiding place. The ballroom seemed even more intimidating from a standing position, and Miguel braced himself for the humiliation he assumed was coming. Instead, Roberto did something that would echo through Miguel's life for decades to come. He pulled out a chair at his own table, the head table where the event's most distinguished guests were seated, and said 5 words that Miguel would never forget: "You belong here too, son." The reaction around the table was immediate and uncomfortable. A woman in a glittering dress physically recoiled. A banker in a 3-piece suit looked at Roberto as if he'd lost his mind. Whispers rippled through nearby tables as people noticed the street child now sitting among the city's elite. But Roberto didn't flinch. He personally served Miguel from the main course, filled his glass with juice, and then did something even more remarkable. He didn't just feed the boy and send him away with a full stomach. He sat beside him and talked to him like an equal. He asked Miguel about his life, his dreams, what he thought about when he went to sleep at night. And Miguel, for perhaps the first time in his young life, felt like someone actually wanted to hear his answers. "You know what separates people in this room from people like you?" Roberto asked as Miguel devoured a piece of grilled salmon. Miguel shook his head, expecting to hear about money or education or connections. "Nothing," Roberto said firmly. "Nothing separates you from anyone here except circumstances you were born into." And circumstances can change. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to ensure only Miguel could hear. I grew up in a favela not far from where you probably sleep. I ate from dumpsters. I wore shoes with holes until I was 12 years old. The only difference between the boy I was and the man I became wasn't talent or luck. It was one thing: someone showed me that I had value before I had money. And now I'm showing you. What Roberto shared with Miguel that night wasn't just inspirational rhetoric. It was a fundamental philosophy that he'd used to build his own fortune, and it contradicted nearly everything our culture teaches about success. Roberto believed that most people approach wealth from a position of scarcity and competition. They see resources as limited, opportunities as rare, and other people as threats to their own advancement. This mindset, Roberto explained, might help you survive, but it will never help you thrive. True wealth, the kind that endures and multiplies across generations, comes from a completely different source: the ability to see value in places others overlook and to lift others while you climb. Roberto's restaurant empire hadn't been built on cutthroat competition or exploiting workers. It had been built on a radical model: hiring people that nobody else would give a chance. Ex-convicts. Recovering addicts. Homeless youth. Single mothers with gaps in their resumes. People that traditional businesses saw as risky investments, Roberto saw as untapped potential. He didn't just give them jobs, he gave them ownership stakes, sent them to culinary school, helped them secure housing. Critics called him naive. Business consultants warned he'd go bankrupt. Instead, his employee retention rate was the highest in the industry, his staff loyalty was unmatched, and the publicity from his unconventional model brought customers through the door in droves. His businesses didn't succeed despite his philosophy of radical inclusion, they succeeded because of it. But the most important thing Roberto shared with Miguel wasn't about business strategy. It was about identity. The world will try to tell you who you are based on where you sleep tonight, Roberto said, gesturing around the opulent ballroom. But the truth is, you get to decide who you become. Not your circumstances. Not your past. Not what people assume about you when they see your clothes or your address. You decide. He pulled out his wallet and showed Miguel a photo he always carried, a picture of himself at 8 years old, painfully thin, standing in front of a tin roof shack. This boy became me. And you can become whoever you decide to be. But here's the key: when you make it, when you get your seat at tables like this, you have to remember what it felt like to be under the table. Because that memory is what will make your success mean something. Roberto didn't just give Miguel a meal and a pep talk. He gave him a phone number, written on a business card that Miguel clutched like a lifeline. When you're ready to stop surviving and start building, you call me, Roberto said as the gala was ending. Miguel kept that card in his pocket every single day for the next 3 years, even as he continued to struggle on the streets, even as it became worn and barely legible. On his 10th birthday, sleeping in an abandoned building with rain dripping through holes in the ceiling, Miguel made a decision. He found a pay phone and called the number. Roberto answered on the second ring, and his first words were, "I've been waiting for you to call." What happened next wasn't a fairy tale. Roberto didn't simply adopt Miguel or hand him a trust fund. Instead, he did something more valuable: he offered him a job as a dishwasher at one of his restaurants, along with a spot in a group home Roberto funded for homeless youth. The work was hard. Miguel scrubbed pots until his hands were raw. He woke up at 5 in the morning to prep vegetables before school. There were days he wanted to quit, days when going back to the streets seemed easier than the discipline Roberto demanded. But Roberto had given him something more powerful than money: he'd given him a vision of who he could become and a pathway to get there. And Miguel discovered something crucial: once you've been shown your own potential, you can never fully go back to accepting less. Over the next 8 years, Miguel worked his way up through Roberto's organization. Dishwasher to prep cook to line cook to sous chef. Roberto paid for his education, but made him earn every promotion through skill and dedication. More importantly, Roberto taught Miguel the philosophy that had guided his own journey. Money is a tool, not a destination, Roberto would say during their weekly mentoring sessions. The question isn't how much you make. It's what you build with it and who you bring along. By the time Miguel turned 18, he wasn't just an employee. He was being groomed for leadership, with Roberto openly discussing plans to help Miguel eventually open his own restaurant. But the real transformation wasn't in Miguel's bank account or his culinary skills. It was in how he saw himself and others. In 2023, 12 years after a terrified boy crawled out from under a banquet table, Miguel stood in front of a crowd at a charity gala benefiting homeless youth. But this time, he wasn't hiding. He was the keynote speaker, invited to share his story at an event that had raised over $2 million. Roberto sat in the front row, now in his 70s, beaming with pride at the man Miguel had become. Miguel had opened his first restaurant 2 years earlier, a small place that served gourmet food at prices subsidized by a pay-what-you-can model for those in need. It had been featured in national magazines, not because it was profitable, though surprisingly, it was, but because it represented a new model of purpose-driven business. Miguel hired exclusively from populations others dismissed, the formerly homeless, refugees, people rebuilding their lives after incarceration, but the moment that brought the entire ballroom to tears came when Miguel paused his speech and gestured to the back of the room. "I need to show you all something," he said. He walked down from the stage and approached a table where servers were setting up for dinner. And there, he got down on his knees and lifted the tablecloth. Underneath, staged for this exact moment, was a young girl named Sophia, a 9-year-old who'd been living in her family's car after her parents lost their jobs. Miguel extended his hand, just as Roberto had done for him. "Come out," he said gently. "You belong here too." As Sophia emerged, trembling and uncertain, Miguel pulled out a chair at the head table and sat beside her. "You know what separates you from anyone in this room?" he asked her, echoing words that had been spoken to him years ago. The entire audience held its breath, and Sophia shook her head. "Nothing," Miguel said. "Absolutely nothing except circumstances that are about to change." Miguel announced that he was launching a foundation, funded by a portion of his restaurant's profits, to provide job training and placement for homeless youth. Sophia and her family would be the first beneficiaries. But more than the practical help, Miguel wanted Sophia to receive what Roberto had given him, a glimpse of a different future and the belief that she could reach it. As the crowd erupted in applause, Miguel locked eyes with Roberto across the room. No words were needed. The look said everything. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for showing me that success isn't about escaping your past, but about transforming it into a ladder for others to climb." Here's what most people miss about this story: Roberto didn't save Miguel by giving him money. He saved him by giving him dignity first. In a world obsessed with pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, Roberto understood a fundamental truth: some people don't have boots, and even if they did, bootstraps don't work without a foundation to stand on. Real success isn't measured by how high you climb above others. It's measured by how many people you bring with you. It's measured by whether you remember what it felt like to be invisible and use your visibility to shine a light on those still in the shadows. Roberto built a fortune, but his real legacy was showing one boy under a table that his life had value, and that boy went on to show others the same thing. The question isn't whether you'll be successful. It's whether your success will matter. Will you use it to build higher walls around your own comfort, or will you use it to build longer tables where more people can sit? Miguel learned that the most powerful thing you can do with privilege isn't to guard it jealously, but to extend it generously. Every single person watching this video has some form of privilege, education, opportunity, resources, connections that others lack. The choice is whether you'll use those advantages to climb alone or to lift others. Because here's the truth that Roberto knew and Miguel learned: the only success that satisfies is the kind that echoes beyond yourself. So the next time you're at your own metaphorical table, wherever that might be, take a moment to look underneath. Who's hiding there? Who's been told they don't belong? Who's watching a world they've been told they'll never access? And then ask yourself, will you walk past them, or will you extend your hand and say those 5 transformative words: "You belong here too"? That choice, more than any business decision or career move you'll ever make, will determine whether you're truly successful or just temporarily comfortable. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share your own story of someone who saw your potential in the comments below. And subscribe because we're building a community of people who believe that rising alone isn't rising at all. Remember, we're all just one choice away from changing someone's life. Make that choice count.